is currently the Director of Government Transparency and the Director of Finance and Administration at the Pioneer Institute. She brings great expertise in addressing tonight's topic, the myth of MBTA underfunding and how to fix the T. So let's welcome Mary.
Well, it's great to be here and to see so many familiar faces. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm glad to be here. And I'm happy to talk a bit about the T. I take the commuter rail in from Framingham, so I've experienced a lot of T issues as of late, as I'm sure many of you have. But so much of our troubles with the T actually date back to the Big Dig, mitigation specifically. There are two broad categories of mitigation. The first category was more for open space to create new parks, and these were paid out of the Big Dig project funds. Does anyone know how much the Big Dig actually cost?
Does anyone know?
24 with interest, right. So these various projects, mitigation projects, were actually paid for with the Big Dig funds. Those were like the Rose Kennedy Greenway, Spectacle Island, Romney Marsh renovation, East Boston parks, the Charles River Basin parks. There was a lot of noise mitigation, sidewalk mitigation, all that mitigation work. And some say that came to about 1/3 of the project cost. I don't know, that sounds a little high. But that mitigation was paid for with Big Dig funds. Now there was another type of mitigation related to public transit. They were concerned that with the new roadways, the Big Dig, being a roadway, would attract more vehicles, more trucks, more cars, and emissions from those vehicles would really be bad for the environment. So they wanted to come up with a way to mitigate the impact of the emissions from all the vehicles that will now be traveling through the city on the Big Dig. So part of the state reached an agreement with the Conservation Law Foundation back in 1990 on various projects that would be included in mass transit to keep more people from using the roads. So that was an agreement, specific legal agreement between the state and the Conservation Law Foundation. And they wanted to push public transportation. They also wanted to make public transportation affordable. So part of that agreement included capping the amount of fares, the amount the fares can be for public transportation. They wanted to get as many people to use it as possible. But that kind of stymied the T to an extent because they can only raise fares so much. It's great to get everyone on the road, but it also has a financial impact, as things do. There's always a financial impact to everything that is done. Now, they said that the fares couldn't be raised higher than the rate of inflation or the rate of cost for fuel or to other transportation costs. Whatever was lower, that was the highest they could raise fares. So what mitigation projects were funded by the T? So the T actually had to fund these projects. They weren't part of the Big Dig money, but they were called Big Dig mitigation projects. So when they talk about Big Dig debt related to the T, has anyone heard that term? Yeah. No. There really isn't Big Dig debt related to the T. It only relates to T projects that were a result of the mitigation for the Big Dig to actually happen. Okay. So these projects were the Greenbush line that was expanded, there's the Plymouth extension, the Ipswich line, the commuter rail line. These are commuter rail projects. The Ipswich line was expanded up to Newburyport. My line, the Framingham line, was expanded to Worcester. They did work on the Lynn Square Central Station, North Station. They put new platforms in and new tracks. They put new tracks in at South Station. All of that was for the commuter rail. They also expanded South Station to access the red line for the actual T. They did work on the blue line, the Green Line extension project to Medford, which is going on right now. That was all part of these projects. They did work on the buses. They increased the South Station terminal. I don't know if they use that, but that's all part of these projects. The T has to take on cost.
The South Station terminal looks different every 5 years. In the 30 years that I've been in the city, if you go If you go there and then 5 years later, you will not recognize it.
It changes
Every 5 years.
That's true. And then on top of that, they put a cap on the amount of parking spaces that there could be in the city. Because again, they didn't want any more private lots, so more people would be driving in. Again, the push to public transportation, hence the need to expand the T, hence the need for additional costs. So they capped the amount of parking spaces, but what they did, as part of this agreement with Conservation Law Foundation, was to increase the amount of parking outside of the city. 20,000 additional spaces were built at various commuter lots, all on the T to pay for new parking lots, new costs, new maintenance costs. All this was foisted upon the T as part of this agreement. Again, some of these projects were on the books even before the big dig, but we all know what construction projects related to transportation on the books means. It means it can be deferred into perpetuity. But this actually made it come close to happening. So those are the mitigation parts. Now, even at that time, the T still required massive subsidies from the state. So what would happen is the T would incur its costs, all its operating costs, go about, and then they go back to the legislature at the end of the year, at the end of the period, and say, you need to back fund all of our costs. The legislature would have to cough up the money to pay for the T. And ultimately, the state leaders said it's better for the T to have more independence, more financial independence. So they took on a policy, or implemented a policy called forward funding. Anyone hear of that? Forward funding was they're no longer going to just backfill the costs after the fact. They're going to give the T a sense of independence. They're going to give them 20% of all the sales tax raised. At that time, it was a penny for every nickel raised, went to the T to try to fund it, and they knew that they would have this revenue stream. Part of the deal was, though, that the T was supposed to reduce operating costs by 2% each year. It was supposed to be, now they're independent, now they're going to start reducing costs. They thought the sales tax is going to go up each year by 3%. They're going to ultimately wind up with some type of a surplus that they can use to retire the debt. Because also part of forward funding was for the T to take on the debt of T projects that were on the state's books. It's like $1.8 billion. So the T was supposed to now pay that back with the surplus that was supposed to build, because the sales tax revenues were supposed to go up, the T board was supposed to decrease the costs, and everything would be great, right? So we all know that that didn't happen, right? The costs kept going up and up and up and up, uncontrollable costs. So in 2007, a couple of years earlier, the legislature commissioned a group, the Finance Commission, to really take a look at statewide transportation issues, not just the T. But they came out with a report in 2007 that said that the state was basically looking at a $19 billion deficit over the next decade, next 20 years, excuse me, for the T. Not for the T, for all transportation projects. And that deficit wasn't for expansion. That $19 billion was just to maintain the existing assets, the tracks that we have, the highways that we have, the bridges that we have, the buses that we have, not to expand more highways and more track. That was just to keep what we have in good shape. And so people's jaws dropped. $19 billion, where's that going to come from? $8 billion of that $19 billion related to the T cost. So the T was, as we know, was in rough financial condition. So shortly after the 2007 report came out, people were kind of mad about the big dig to begin with. People didn't like the Turnpike Authority. I know I was on the Turnpike Board and saw a lot of how much people really thought about the Turnpike Authority. So the state decided we're going to fix everything right now. We have this huge deficit. We have this Turnpike Authority we don't like. The big dig was so bad. It was just such a terrible thing. We're going to consolidate transportation agencies. We're going to put it all together. We're going to save $6.5 billion over the next 10 years because we're going to do this, consolidate, we're going to be able to control our costs, we're going to be able to plan, it's going to be great. And we're going to have to raise the sales tax too as a result because we need more money for the T.